Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and changemakers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Coster, your host. This episode is part of our documentary series, From Bankruptcy to Reinvention, the City of Stockton, California. The documentary series attempts to provide listeners with the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the various voices of changemakers working to reinvent the City of Stockton. The interviews were conducted from August to September 2016, leading up to the election of Mayor Michael Tubbs, who is our central character in the series. The interviews in the documentary series have been edited to fit into our show format. The unedited full interviews will be posted on my website, georgecoster.com, along with each episode of the series.
I remember one time I called a meeting with the mayor and a council member and made the agenda and then facilitated the meeting with the mayor and council member there. And everyone was like, who was this 15-year-old kid?
In this episode, we feature the voice of Michael Tubbs. We have broken the episode down into two parts. Part 1 takes place back in the summer of 2016 when I caught up with Michael Tubbs, who was, at the time, the youngest city council member in Stockton history and one of the youngest elected officials in the United States. Michael was, as you heard in episode 11 from Tama Brisbane, working to change Stockton's history by making history. Michael was making a run to become the youngest and first African-American mayor of his hometown.
My name is Michael Tubbs, born and raised in Stockton. I represent City Council. It's the same area I grew up in and came of age in. So when we're talking about closing problem liquor stores or we're talking about areas where drug trafficking, it's not just stuff that I read in the newspaper. It's things I've lived and experienced, which I think gives me a great perspective and a little bit of nuance in terms of the solutions we produce. So growing up in Stockton, my mom, she had me when she was a teenager, and my father has been incarcerated my entire life. So I grew up in poverty, grew up in quote-unquote tough neighborhoods, but there were a lot of different community supports and inputs that helped me get to where I am today. So my mom and my grandmother, they made sure that I had structured activities in play. There was a lot of recreation opportunities available in the city. I remember playing recreation basketball literally year-round, and then AAU. We had a strong support system in our church that provided some spiritual underpinning and structure and leadership opportunities. And I was able to go to high-quality magnet public school. So I was in the IB program from the time I was in 7th grade to 12th grade. And then because of a lot of those experiences, there was a lot of youth leadership opportunities as well. So I remember being chair of the Youth Advisory Commission for 2 years, Education Action Team. So by the time I was 14, 15, 16, I was used to being in meetings with city officials and bureaucrats and sometimes even running the meetings. I remember one time I called a meeting with the mayor and a council member and made the agenda and then facilitated the meeting with the mayor and council member there. And everyone was like, who was this 15-year-old kid? Because of a lot of those experiences, I was able to get a full ride to go to Stanford for 4 years. And at Stanford, through my 4 years, I thought that was my chance to make a lot of money and leave Stockton behind. But throughout my time there, I did a lot of work in East Palo Alto, tutoring and running after-school programs. I started a nonprofit that did college admissions consulting for free for first-generation low-income students that's still going, called the Phoenix Scholars. But then in about 2010, I was interning in the White House for Intergovernmental Affairs, and my job was to work with mayors and councils nationwide. And while doing that, it was interesting to see what things were happening at a local level, how people were really making things happen for their cities. And I thought, well, hey, I need to go and find good people in Stockton to donate to so that the people who live in Stockton enjoy good governance. And then around that time, one of my cousins was murdered in the spike of homicide Stockton saw in 2010, 2011. And going back home, dealing with the pain and the funeral, it caused me to question kind of the path I was on, because the summer before I had interned at Google, I thought I was going to be a management consultant. But then going home and really dealing with the pain, I realized that a lot of the opportunities I had been given had to be more for me to be comfortable and materially rich. So that's when I decided I would one day move back to Stockton. And then 2011 came, and we had another year of record homicides, another spike. It was my senior year in college, and I was just torn as to what I wanted to do. I thought I was going to be a Rhodes Scholar in England for 3 years, and that didn't work out. So I thought I would just get a job, figure things out as I went on. And then coming home that Christmas break, there was talk about this thing called a Marshall Plan to deal with crime that hadn't yet materialized. And I took it really personal. So to make a long story short, that's when I decided to run for office. So I guess in summation, I'm just a born and raised Stocktonian who was really blessed to have been exposed to a lot and got a lot of opportunities and came back to kind of make that a reality for more people.
You had people in your life, your grandmother, who I know is very important to you, your aunt, and your mom. What are the things that they could have instilled in you that you feel like really helped you build that sense of character, that sense that you could be a leader?
Yeah, I would say they were incredibly wise, and that despite the very real challenges and the very real resource scarcity, if you will, they always spoke in terms of assets versus deficit. And I'm not even sure if they even know that frame. My whole upbringing was assets based. It was, you're smart. You're just as smart as everyone else. You can do it. Do you need help? What help can we give you? Or a B is not acceptable if you can get an A, so get A's. And it was almost as if to inoculate around all the real challenges in the neighborhood. It was just instilled just this belief in yourself, but also in a higher power that, no, this may be difficult, but it's not insurmountable, it's not impossible. And then also just a very strong cultural upbringing. So by the time I was in 6th grade, I think I read every one of Frederick Douglass's autobiographies and all of Booker T. Washington's and all of MLK, and read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was in 5th grade. Things like that. So it really instilled in me not just a sense of pride, but a sense of possibility that despite challenges and structural obstacles, there are paths to be successful.
You had mentors in your life, and I know that you're very engaged in your church and faith. How have those two things you think help build your character?
I would not be doing the work I do in politics if it wasn't for faith. I think oftentimes people of faith get a bad rap because the Bible is really abused and used as a tool of oppression, when it's actually a liberatory book if you actually read it. I remember in college discovering scriptures like the righteous care about justice for the poor, or whatever I require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God, or plead the cause of the fatherless and the widow and the orphan. And all the prophets, that's what they spoke about. But that just really motivates the work I do now. In Stockton, in many places, a city that's forgotten, a city that's full of orphans and fatherless children and widows and oppressed folks that need people to not cry out for them but with them, but also think through how do you make sure that all the institutions are working for their benefit and not for their detriment. So I think faith really informs a lot of my political work, because if it wasn't for that, I would definitely be doing something else.
Is there a mentor that you could point to, or I know that your pastor is very important to you, someone who's acted as a mentor and provided a hand up in that direction?
I would say a lot of my mentors I have, it's more observational. I watch people and see how they walk and see how they talk and see how they treat people, and I learn from that. So I think the variety of pastors, the pastor of my childhood, Alfred Smith, the pastor of my teenager, early adulthood, Dumasani Washington, and then the pastor of the biggest church in my district, Pastor Shields, they've all been mentors in a myriad of ways, just in terms of reaching out to me, talking to me, but also just modeling a life of principle and excellence.
Why reinvent Stockton? How did you get the idea? And then more importantly, how did you put the team of people together?
So one of my best friends in life is Cameron Henry. Met him in college. He's not a Stockton guy, but he just knew my passion for Stockton, because every paper I wrote at Stanford was about Stockton or an issue facing Stockton. So after the city council race, he was like my manager for the first month while we found somebody while studying for the MCAT and doing other crazy things. And he came down and we were just listening to folks. We were talking about the campaign and what I wanted to do, and we were thinking about a theme. And he said, I'm not from here, but it sounds like that what we're really talking about is reinvention. That's brilliant. And he's like, well, reinvent Stockton. And we put a hashtag on it, and that became kind of the rallying cry for the campaign 2012. That's the year we declared bankruptcy. That's the year we had a record number of homicides. The mood in the community was really different than the mood you feel now. It was very melancholy and downtrodden. It just needed a boost of energy in a reinvention, if you will. And then it really caught on. Even if you go on Twitter now, you put in reinvent Stockton, you have people who are affiliated and aren't affiliated talking about things they're doing to make the community better. So you say, oh wow, we've created something that people are really attached to. And then when I was elected, we had all these people rallied around and excited about this idea of reinvent Stockton. So it took a year to really think through, how do I channel that energy into something that will make the city better. So then my district, South Stockton, had a lot of issues, and there were a lot of organizations who were excited about the idea of Reinvent Stockton. So I brought them together, and we started the Reinvent South Stockton Coalition, which is really a 3-part thing. The first thing, it's a collective impact strategy to boost outcomes in South Stockton around 5 key areas using a very rigorous evidence-based indicator result framework that we learned from PolicyLink. Second thing is creating a civic engagement structure so that folks can be involved in reinventing their community. So that looks like our park cleanups we do every month with over 100 people for the past year. Each time we just built a park at Liberty Park on East Jefferson Street. And then the third thing was to create a voice for South Stockton, because I realized in my first 2 years on council that a lot of the stuff we were able to get done, whether it was city funding for the gym or whether it was the grand jury issuing a report, was just because I was at the table talking about it and making it an issue. And it's like, well, we can't risk the needs of South Stockton being met based on who the political leaders are, because you may not always have good political leaders. But the work has to continue. So how do we create a community voice that will always be at the table, so that institutions know when it's time to do work in South Stockton, meet with this coalition of folks and organizations first. So that's kind of where the impetus for the work come from. And last year we had our first Reinvent South Stockton Summit. We had over 300 people attend, across institutions, across race, from throughout the city, to think through how do we make South Stockton better. And this year it's been incredible. We just opened a health clinic at the Dorothy Jones Center. We shut down New Grand Safe Liquor Market. We just won a $500,000 trauma recovery grant from California Endowment to do trauma-informed care for the residents of South Stockton. We've just done incredible work, and a lot of it comes from leadership and bringing the people together who have the solutions, and then forcing us to do the hard work of working together and acquiescing our individual wills and agenda for the collective one. But now people are seeing that, wow, this actually works, and we've been able to accelerate things that people said would never happen in the past 3 years.
You're listening to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. This is George Coster, your host, and if you're just joining us, in this episode we're discussing the reinvention of the City of Stockton, California. We've been listening to an interview I conducted in the summer of 2016 with then City Council member Michael Tubbs. In part 2 of our episode, we wanted to sit down with now Mayor Michael Tubbs and revisit all of the work he was doing in 2016, his campaign promises, his vision for the city of Stockton, and find out what have been the outcomes of these efforts.
There's now another group called the All-Star Collaborative of other nonprofit partners who may not be at the steering committee level for Reinvent South Stockton, but are doing important work in the community. I think all those are new creations, but they come from the idea that the way to solve these problems, these big, messy, hairy problems in the city, is through collaboration. I'm Michael Tubbs, Mayor of the City of Stockton, California.
The whole purpose of today was to try to go back to some of the same issues we talked about 2 years ago, items that you talked about when you became mayor and your swearing in ceremony.
Well, I think it's been really interesting since becoming mayor, seeing how Reinvent South Stockton's role has changed. We did a really good job, I think, of building capacity, so I'm not as involved in the day-to-day anymore, but the work seems to continue. Now we're pivoting and trying to figure out how do we bring that same model to the rest of the city, which is easier said than done, but something we'll work toward.
I know to that end, you've created Reinvent Stockton now, and then you and Lane have come together with the Stockton Scholars Program.
Yeah, so we created a foundation called the Reinvent Stockton Foundation, which is really a home to a lot of philanthropic gifts folks want to make to the city. The largest thus far has been the Stockton Scholars, which is a $20 million donation we received from the California Community Foundation. That will make it that for the next 10 years, Cal State University tuition will be free for 90% of students in Stockton Unified School District. So we're incredibly excited, incredibly proud. And yes, Lane Lunta is the executive director of the foundation and also runs that program.
Was that part of the original program that you and Rebecca had created when you were in Stanford?
It's a continuation of the Phoenix Scholars Program, which we started in college. And the idea behind the Phoenix Scholars was to identify high-achieving first-generation students and pair them up with a college counselor or consultant for free. But it didn't really solve the issue of affordability. So now we have the second of that. And we have some Phoenix Scholars working with our kids in Stockton. But this is really around how do we triple the number of college graduates from Stockton in the next decade.
When we talked a couple years ago, a big part of that was the whole blight issue and slumlords. And in my conversation with Fred at Stan, and you were getting control of working on the liquor store at that point, I know Fred's piece was, of course, more people from the city going out and helping push landlords to do what's needed to make safe buildings.
So it's an ongoing struggle, but something we've worked on since this interview or before that interview. We were able to shut down the problem liquor store. So the liquor store was closed down. The receiver didn't give Fred and Stan control of the site, so it was a Dollar General there. But adjacent to that is a plot of land that Stan has an exclusive negotiating right with the city to work on and work towards. So we're really excited about that. We're hoping that project moves forward. It's very difficult. It's not going to be easy, but if executed, it will be a big deal for that community. So citywide, we started a program called STOP. Stockton's Top Offending Properties. So properties that pose the greatest risk of harm to the community. And systematically between the city attorney's office, fire office, etc., meeting every month, figure out where the status on these properties. So with that, we've been working with landlords, bringing things up to code. We've condemned some properties, and we're kind of moving to clean up Stockton so it's not a haven for slumlords.
Part of the bankruptcy was essentially getting rid of a lot of overhead in the form of staff. Some of that staff was inspectors, etc. Since the city's come out of bankruptcy, have you been able to backfill some of those jobs to help?
Backfill, but most of our staffing since bankruptcy has been around. We have Measure M. So most of our staff has been around where we have dedicated funds. So we have Measure M, which pays for parks and libraries. So we have more staff in parks and recreation and libraries department. And then Measure A and B, which funds our Office of Violence Prevention, but also funds our police officers. So today we have more officers than we've ever had in our city's history. And we've been able to hire some of the other kind of back office or non-law enforcement positions, but very minimally.
What would you have to do in rallying fellow city council members, et cetera, to find the resources to hire back some of the people to help you execute your vision of reinventing?
I don't think the issue is even with marshaling the will or marshaling the resources, just that in a city with such great need, where do you prioritize where the resources go? And how do you make sure we don't use one-time money on ongoing costs like a staffing, right? So I think in lieu of having more staff, what we can do is take a good look at our existing staff, our processes and our policies and how we work together and figure out how to get more alignment so we're able to stretch what we have further. And I think the STOP program is a good example of that.
One of the things I know you've worked on since you've become a city council person and now mayor, and part of your swearing in was the whole idea of economic development in downtown, which has been struggling for decades. How is that going with regards to the partnership with Centro and the downtown merchants?
Yeah, slowly but surely. Luckily, our downtown area has been designated as an opportunity zone, meaning that for folks who are looking to invest, it makes sense to invest in downtown, get the tax benefit, do some good while doing well. In addition to that, there's some developments coming online from 10 Space and others. City Hall is moving. We'll be talking about where we're going to move this old City Hall. The Sacramento Kings G League team just moved to Stockton, so the Stockton Kings are bringing more life and liveliness to our downtown. So a lot of good things are absolutely happening in our downtown. I think over the next 4 or 5 years, you really begin to see a revive.
I know the waterfront's been a part of the old redevelopment agency. It's a struggle over the years. Where would you like to see the waterfront go to?
I think we want to see a waterfront just like either Jack London Square in Oakland or the San Antonio Riverwalk. So we have a vision. We just have to figure out who's going to be our development partner to execute that vision. But again, I think with the Opportunity Zone designation, there's a chance to do something really special there.
I want to turn to education because I know that's another one of your favorite topics, the whole Stockton initiatives. Can you talk a little bit about the school district? How is it going? Where would you like to take it?
It's going well. There used to be the South Stockton Schools Initiative. Now it's the Stockton Schools Initiative. They're beginning work with Lodi, Lincoln Unified. They recently had a State of Education in Stockton Summit where they released a data report that showed the amount of work we have to do with the community, and they're working with parents and students to understand that data and push for policy change. They were instrumental in getting us a new superintendent. They were instrumental in pushing the A through G for all policy as a graduation policy for the school district. So that work is still continuing, and I guess we just like to see it expanded so that every district has a dedicated group of parents and students whose focus is making the districts do even better.
Do you feel like the school district is receptive to it and they're working with you as partner?
Well, I think especially Stockton Unified School District particularly, their new superintendent, John Daisy, is adamant supporter of Trustee Luntown. Before he was trustee, he was actually the founder or co-founded the organization, so he's a big supporter. And people really trust Jasmine, Nancy, the rest of the team, and look forward to them for leadership and for them to push, and sometimes get on people's nerves.
Coming from South Stockton, growing up there, it's always been a violent place. I know from your own personal tragedy, and that's been another one of your big areas of focus is crime and violence and public safety. I know police was an issue. How do you feel it's going, and where would you like to have it go in the next 2 years?
We still haven't arrived, but for example, this year, non-fatal shooting and homicides are down 35+% compared to last year, and hopefully next year is even lower still. So we're still laser focused on preserving the lives of our citizens. 90% of them who are murderers or victims of homicides are young men of color. So in addition to our existing ceasefire strategy, we brought in another strategy called Advanced Peace to really focus on the guys who are driving on gun crimes and bringing that number down. Our police department, our police chiefs have been doing amazing work with reconciliation and internal reform around procedural justice and implicit bias training. Again, we have more officers than we've ever had. South Stockton, actually, if you look at the crime map, it used to be like bright red, and now it's like yellowish green. So it's no longer one of the most 10 most crime-ridden places in the city, which it had been for decades. So really proud of that. So yeah, we still have a ways to go, but we're trending in the right direction.
One of the things that Fred was working on at Stan was just the housing component of it as well. How is the homeless issue? How are you addressing that one? And it's very complex.
So on the city end, we are laser-like focused on the things we can control. Things that we have allocated general fund dollars for homelessness cleanups. We've allocated money to start a housing mitigation fund from partnering with Caltrans to employ individuals experiencing homelessness to work. And we're partnering with the county on their task force to kind of deliver services for those who are homeless. In addition, we have a whole housing and homelessness task force at the city level that's focused on sort of how do we bring more affordable units online? What do we need to do as a city to do that?
So would that be like streamlining, planning, zoning?
Looking forward to the recommendations, but
right.
All those things are on the table.
Housing First was one of the things that you've thrown out, and it's one of those policies. Can you share with the audience a little bit about what is Housing First?
Housing First is the idea that the issue with homelessness is that folks don't have housing or can't afford housing. And even those who may have mental illnesses or drug addictions, etc., it's very hard to get treatment when you're not stabilized. We're not in a safe place every day. So Housing First is the idea that you put folks in housing first and then you deliver services to them. It's been shown to have great success in San Diego County and in Utah, Salt Lake City, I think. So it seems to be the emerging best practice around the best way to eradicate homelessness.
And the hard part is location, funds.
The hard part is location, funds, and figuring out, who's going to build them.
I think the wraparound services component of it as well, because homelessness is a byproduct of mental illness, drug addiction,
housing affordability,
losing one's job, etc. I know you've gotten both a lot of positive feedback on and a lot of what is he doing is the whole idea of the city-led guaranteed economic initiative of Stockton's economic empowerment demonstration. Tell us a little bit about why you put that together and how the program's been executed with regards to the whole idea of kind of a universal income.
We were able to get a grant from a group called the Economic Security Project, and they've been raising on top of that. It's really identifying what does the income floor look like, what the guaranteed income demonstration look like in the city. So in essence, Stocktonians who make $46,000 a year or less will be given $500 a month for 18 months. There will be evaluation from researchers to really figure out sort of what does a basic income look like, what does a basic income do, and what's its efficacy as a matter of public policy. So we launch in Q1 next year, and we're really excited about that. It's gotten a lot of attention, but it's also taken a lot of time and resources. But we think it's worth it, given that the average income in the city is $46,000 a year. Most of our folks are working extremely hard. That's not been rewarded with wages that could allow them to live in the community they grew up in. So we feel it's incumbent on us as leaders to kind of be bold and articulate solutions to said problem.
The recipient of that, what is their requirement? What do they have to do to engage in that program?
To qualify, the criterion is live in a neighborhood at or below the median income of the city. And if you're selected, you're able to be part of the program. And then part of it's just like some reporting and things like that.
Does that give them access to any other wraparound services, job training?
Services, but no different than the services they could get in the city now. So we're not mandating any participation in the program or anything like that.
What's your hoped outcome for it?
I hope that the findings are consistent with findings we've seen of similar cash disbursements. Namely, number one, there's no labor market impact, i.e. people don't stop working. Number two, that folks generally spend the money on good things. They're not wasting, quote unquote, wasting the money. Number three, there's a positive impact on stress, anxiety, and other health outcomes.
I know through working with you and your groups that your whole vision of Reinvent Stockton, Reinvent South Stockton, how it started, I think it would be really interesting for the audience to understand what's the ecosystem that you've helped create from San Joaquin Pride Center to Stan to Reinvent South Stockton. When you got sworn in to have people in the city help you reinvent, mm-hmm. What have you created in your coalition of groups and how have people actually participated in the reinvention process?
I think what we've created is a vision married to results and indicators and opportunities for folks to be a part if they're an organization. And we have so many tables set up now where folks are meeting about early literacy or third grade or public safety, etc. all the time. are very regularly in a way that agencies are collaborating. So I think we just really created a culture of collaboration and collective impact to address our shared concerns. In addition to that, we've created another foundation and community that hosts philanthropic gifts. We have a schools initiative as education organizing. We have the Reinvent South Stockton Coalition that does a convening and collecting impact work. There's now another group called the All-Star Collaborative of other nonprofit partners who may not be at the steering committee level for Reinvent South Stockton, but are doing important work in the community. I think all of these are new creations, but they come from the idea that the way to solve these problems, these big, messy, hairy problems in the city, is through collaboration.
And then there's the Fathers and Families group. There's Dylan and Little Manila.
Yeah, what's beautiful is all these groups existed before.
Right.
And some of them work together, but now we have people working together much more intentionally in a way they weren't before.
Is that your vision of trying to bring the whole community together to work together instead of each person going out to try to secure their little piece?
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole idea. It's like, listen, we're all here together. And there's not enough resources, but there is enough need. So if we pull together, we can actually begin to address the need, and maybe more resources will come.
And growing up in Stockton, one of the issues that everyone has always struggled with is north and south. And north was always creeping. First it was March Lane. It was not getting even further. Then it was Hammer. Then it was 8 Mile Road. There's the whole general plan piece that you and the city are working with. How is that going with regards to pulling together to everyone have some kind of common vision of the general plan?
I think everyone pretty much has a common vision. I think some of the confusion is that we put a stipulation that if we were ever to extend past 8 Mile, it would only be for something that meets this criterion that would have to go through the regular and time and process anyway, so nothing would be fast-tracked in. And for good reason, some of our activists are like a little bit paranoid. So we have to do a better job explaining to people like, no, we're saying there will be no growth north of 8 Mile. But if there's like a big CSU that wants to come to Stockton, we will do our best to make sure they have all the land they need. If that requires us for the 8 Mile, as a council, we're comfortable with that decision. So we just have to do a better job of messaging that to the public because for good reason. I mean, every time we do a general plan, we end up getting sued, right? So I think it's good that the public's so engaged and involved, but we all have a shared vision of a Stockton that prioritizes its neighborhoods and its downtown and building that up before expanding and sprawling further.
Being from South Stockton, there's lots of really wonderful vacant land that a CSU would have an amazing impact on.
It would be great.
If you can convince them to do that. It's always the hard part.
It would be great.
So is there anything that I haven't asked you in our conversation?
I forgot to mention Amazon's coming in with 2,000 jobs. We did a report on the status of women in Stockton and doing some exciting things around focusing on the needs of women in our community in particular. Moving ahead, long way to go, but we're so much better than we were even 2 years ago. Amazon is fulfillment center? Yeah, 2 fulfillment centers.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I know how difficult it is to recruit those people.
Yeah, we had to give them no tax benefits or anything, which is great.
I wish you the best of luck in executing your vision.
Well, thank you.
That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voice of Mayor Michael Tubbs, who's been updating us on all of the work that he and his coalition of community leaders have been executing these past 2+ years. As you have traveled down this pathway with us through these past 12 episodes, getting to meet the coalition of community leaders and listening to their stories, I hope that we have helped introduce you to community members just like you, who are, in the words of Dylan Delfo in episode 6, doing the work to save their community because no one else is coming to save it for them. Voices of the Community is a labor of love. This documentary series on the City of Stockton's reinvention is a tribute to my mother, Josephine Coster Wiley, who grew up in South Stockton and passed away during the production of the documentary series. My mom was a first-generation Italian immigrant whose family migrated to Stockton and owned a motel on the Old Charter Way, now renamed Martin Luther King Boulevard, in the heart of South Stockton. Mayor Michael Tubbs also grew up in South Stockton with his single mother, Ricole Dixon. Throughout the series, you'll hear voices of community members who are working with Michael Tubbs in both creating new organizations as well as working with fellow community members to reinvent both South Stockton and the greater Stockton community. I want to thank my associate producers, Eric Estrada and Nick McClinton, as well as advising producer, Malcolm Cecil. Please go to georgecoster.com to check out our next episode of From Bankruptcy to Reinvention, the City of Stockton, California documentary series, as well as our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. Please rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and share the story with your friends. Follow us on Twitter @GeorgeCoster and email us at george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.